United States Department of Commerce seems an odd place to go to catch the pulse throb of the country. But that's where the census block is. Day and night, the year round, the dials and digits register the American heartbeat. Beat varies and the statistics fluctuate. But the story they tell and have told from the beginning is one of growth and growing. There are more than 200 million of us now, with more coming all the time. We've grown so rapidly, faster than any other nation has ever grown, that our whole history has been a rush, a torrent, that swept us on with barely a pause for us to realize where we've been or where we're going. We're so close to our history, in fact, that we tend to forget it's there. But if we stop at the right places, we can still catch glints and colors of a truly fabulous past. In some American cities, it's right there at your elbow, wherever you turn. Restlessness comes with the movement of ships and the swagger of sailors and the eternal changing of the tides. Seaports breed revolutions. And seaports sometimes make inland people uneasy. There used to be a saying, Boston folks are full of notions. It was a true saying. A Boston notion started it all. Today in Boston Harbor, you can walk the deck of old Ironside, the USS Constitution. But she's the relic of a later war. The war we began with, the one that made a nation, started here on British ships. It started when American patriots, disguised as Mohawks, dumped $500,000 worth of tea into Boston Harbor. They thought the British tea monopoly was illegal, and they wouldn't stand for it. If it wasn't exactly a splash heard round the world, it was heard clearly enough in London. The British shut down the port to teach the American upstarts a lesson, and at once a smoldering issue leaped into flame. Who would control the future of a continent? The people who lived there, or a king on an island 3,000 miles away? The Tea Party of 1773 had posed an enormous challenge. Boston's old State House is probably the oldest public building in America, and the 20th century keeps crowding in on it. Crowding in and hurrying by with no time to spare for the past. But the past is always there. It happened in 1770, but it could have been an incident out of our own time. An unruly street mob that taunts and torments a band of soldiers. A panicky shot, a volley, a massacre. The Boston Massacre. Was the Boston Massacre just another senseless street brawl, or was it the historic event the textbooks say it is? Historians decide what's history and what isn't, but it's the poet, after all, who makes men and events immortal. At 19 North Square in Boston, there once lived a certain citizen, a silversmith. Today, every schoolboy and girl knows his name. Not so much for what he did, which was indeed admirable, but mostly for another reason. Longfellow wrote a poem about it. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. One if by land, and two if by sea. The fate of a nation was riding that night. But on that night in '75, there were two other men spreading the cry of alarm also, but who remembers them? No poems were ever written about William Dawes or Samuel Prescott, so Paul Revere gets all the glory. In Boston, Boston, the Bunker Hill Monument is visible from almost everywhere. It's the right monument, but the wrong name. Most of the fighting took place on nearby Breed's Hill, not on Bunker. But call it Bunker or call it Breed, this is where the war began, in earnest. It was the first big battle of the Revolution, and the British came on magnificently. Up the hill and right into the guns of the waiting Yanks. The most formidable troops in the world. The Americans lost the battle and the hill with it. But the victory cost the British dear, and in the end, it cost them America. On Breed's Hill, for the first time, the Patriots stood up to the terrible British regulars in pitched battle, and they learned something. The British could be beaten. The world pays attention to battles, but sometimes an event twice as significant for the future will go unnoticed. Like the occurrence on Milk Street one January day in 1706. A poor candle maker named Josiah Franklin became the father of a son, his 10th. The boy was christened Benjamin, but Boston wasn't to be Ben Franklin's town. Philadelphia would be. It says something about growth and change in America that today's metropolis of 5 million was a colonial town of hardly 10,000 when Benjamin Franklin first saw it. He picked the right place. In Philadelphia, he able to expand and grow into what one admirer called him, a harmonious human multitude. Printer, author, philosopher, humorist, inventor, scientist, statesman. It was a happy blending of personality and... To get to his adopted town, he ran away and hitched a ride down the Delaware on a rowboat. He went ashore at the Market Street Wharf on a Sunday morning in 1723. He was 17 years old, practically penniless and looking for work. Without knowing it, young Ben Franklin was setting the pattern for an imperishable bit of American folklore. He was the original Horatio Alger hero, the poor, homeless boy who makes good in the big city. Deborah Reed chanced to see him passing by that morning. 7 years later, he married her. In the town where he once walked the streets as a nameless stranger, they've named magnificent parkways for him. New generations keep coming to learn his story at first hand in the city he made his own. Once, in a letter, he permitted himself a mild boast. The people happen to love him, he said. They still do. A place called Elpis Alley looks pretty much the same today as when Ben Franklin knew it. Quaint, picturesque. But of course, the people who lived there then didn't think of themselves as quaint. Franklin certainly didn't. As a businessman, he was as sharp and shrewd as any modern. And he made a go-getter success of his printing and publishing enterprises. He had a talent for turning out reams of readable copy. It made his Pennsylvania Gazette a popular paper. And it made his almanac, with its spicy jokes and sage advice, the bestseller of its time. Poor Richard preached the maxims and mottos that young America lived by as it was growing up. Early to bed and early to rise. God helps them that help themselves. Poor Richard could offer his advice with confidence. He knew it would work. It worked for him. He became a municipal do-gooder, the town's #1 booster, a one-man chamber of commerce. He organized the city's first fire department and served with it himself. The original Ben Franklin Fire Company is still rolling. And he also got the streets paved and policed and lighted at night. Wanted to make city life safer and pleasanter for everybody. His schooling was negligible, but today, learned societies and libraries flourish in his name. Franklin and his newspaper raised the money for Pennsylvania's first hospital, and that's still going too. For most, it would have sufficed for a lifetime. Business success, good work, authorship, honors. But when Franklin retired at 42, he was just beginning. Having set the style for the upward mobile American, the self-made man, he now raised his sights high above go-getting and do-gooding. He reached for the sky. When he tempted the lightning in 1752 by flying his kite with its metal key into a thundercloud, it was not as quaint and comical a thing as the old paintings make it look. It was a serious scientific experiment that helped unlock one of the secrets of the universe. Electricity in Franklin's day, what little was known of it, was considered a kind of parlor game. Mild shocks were part of the fun and games at social gatherings. It was the achievement of Benjamin Franklin to convert electricity from a curiosity to a science. From Benjamin Franklin's key and kite and from his other experiments came the advances. The battery, the armature, the condenser that literally electrified the world. They called him the new Prometheus because he had brought down fire from heaven. Of all the founding fathers enshrined at Independence Hall, only one is commonly referred to by a nickname, Ben. For Americans, he remains the warmest and most amiable figure, the most human in the national pantheon. It was said he wasn't asked to write the Declaration of Independence only because his stuffier colleagues were afraid he'd put a joke in it. Once he said, there never was a good war or a bad peace, but he was heart and soul in the war for American independence. When the cause was on the brink of collapse, it was the Yankee diplomacy of Ben Franklin that saved it. He was made minister to France, and poor Richard, the candlemaker's son, became immensely popular at the court of King Louis XVI. It helped him win French support in money, loans, and supplies that was worth a dozen victories on the battlefield. To the jaded French, Ben Franklin was a refreshing curiosity, a shrewd but simple American rustic who could hold his own with royalty. And Franklin deliberately cultivated the backwoods image by sporting a coonskin cap where others wore powdered wigs. He showed where his heart was. In another world, a world that Paris and Versailles could scarcely imagine. Where sheer unexplored immensity dwarfed the Europe of courts and kings, and where natural magnificence opened up unlimited vistas for the future. There was mystery there in the wilderness, and fear of what might lie beyond, of walking where no white man has ever walked since time began. Nevertheless, they came, the woodsman, the pathfinder, the settler. Daniel Boone and his people came, the first to break the barrier of the Appalachians through the Cumberland Gap, the vanguard of that stupendous march along the wilderness road that unlocked the West. It was not like discovering a new country. It was more astonishing than that. It was like a new planet, a place as awesome and strange as the landscape of Jupiter or Mars. A call came from out of the west, bring me men to match my mountain. It was answered. Men came who were the astronauts of their age, men who dared to walk in space that was as strange and remote to people then living as the moon is to us. They were a new breed on the earth, the long hunters, the trappers, the mountain men. They were the first to answer the call, and they knew a wild and surging freedom was born of their time and place. and would never come again.
They were a make of man the world hadn't seen before. Kit Carson, Jim Bridger, and Jedediah Smith, and those others. We were breeding a new type of hero. A fabulous new country had to create its own fables, and the heroes to go with them. Well, we did that, but we did something else that no other country ever did. We made our demigods comical. The tall tale, the wild exaggeration, the raw stuff of American humor. It all comes from myth-making of the frontier. For instance, just listen to Davy Crockett talking about himself. It's all here in one of his almanacs, which were a good deal different from Poor Richard, believe me. I'm that same Davy Crockett who's half horse and half alligator, with a touch of snapping turtle thrown in. I pick my teeth with a pitchfork and I fan myself with a hurricane, and I can put a rifle ball right through the moon. Now, Davy wasn't the only one that talked that way. Not by any means. Now listen to his arch rival, old Mike Fink, the king of the keelboaters. I'm a ringtail roarer, and I can out-jump, out-shout, out-brag, out-drink, and out-fight, rough and tumble, no holds barred, area man on both sides of the river from Pittsburgh to Orleans, and all the way back again to St. Louis. Well, I guess they had to talk in that comical big-mouth way just to keep up their spirits. The wilderness was a terrifying place. Just the same, a lot of their zest and exuberance got into American lore and legend. And it's still there. We've built a broad streak of horse laugh into our homegrown godlings, and we've made them big and crude and hardy, like the country. They were mostly mighty workers who could get the job done and laugh about it, like the idol of the logging camp, Paul Bunyan. And the great-granddaddy of all the cowboys, the legendary Pecos Bill. Strange, it wasn't the Mayflower Pilgrim or the Founding Father, intrepid pioneer, that got the tightest grip on the American imagination. It was the cowpoke. He seemed an unlikely candidate for the same gallery of demigods that includes Achilles and Siegfried and Sir Lancelot. But by some miracle of myth-making, he joined the club. A sun god in leather pants, somebody called him. And from the beginning, he looked the part. He had the hard, manly features and the cool, steely gaze that told the world, I'm a dauntless hero. When I make my move, let the wicked beware. No predicament was ever too much for him. No physical feat was beyond him. No matter what the calamity might be, he always emerged unscathed and in calm command. The damsel in distress is a classic, but in the West, it couldn't be a dragon that threatened her, or a knight in shining armor that rescued her. But the idea was the same. The good guys begin the bad guys. What the Western was really was one long morality play in which evil eternally threatened, but good always triumphed. In the ritual of the walk down, the man-to-man, face-to-face confrontation of the good guy and the bad guy, The Western developed a classic situation all its own, as rigidly choreographed as a ballet. That was the West it was, or never was. Now, whether it ever really existed doesn't seem to make the slightest difference. In the imagination of millions throughout the world, it is far more real than anything that is documented in history books, and twice as interesting. But there was a real frontier, and real men lived on it, and it shaped the character of America and Americans for generations. On the real frontier, there wasn't much call to rescue maidens from stampeding buffaloes. There were other excitements. What made most men pull up stakes in the East and head for the West was not just the romance of the thing or the call of the wild. The thing that moved most of them was, well, what has always moved men from one place to another? Maybe history hasn't paid enough attention to the lone prospector. He changed things. If he found enough of those little yellow glints at the bottom of his pan, well, that place would never be the same again. Wide, empty spaces would suddenly come to life. The rush would be on. It happened in '59 in the Colorado Mountains. A place called Gregory Gulch mushroomed from 15 inhabitants to 10,000 in 1 month. Into towns like Cripple Creek and Leadville, Central City, poured whole new populations, roving and searching American types, forever ready to try their luck and take their chance. They were coarse and acquisitive, mostly, but they had the drive and confidence to turn their backs on the settled society of the East and face the challenge of the West. If life was harder there, it was also freer. On the frontier, you could live with the lid off. It was for sure another world from the one Ben Franklin knew. His pious maxims would have been a joke here. The frontier was a new and different America. Restless, adventurous, cruel, violent. And it left a stamp on the national character. Many a man who came to the frontier looking for excitement and adventure found more of it than he bargained for. Against the lawless, the law-abiding had no choice but to defend themselves. But sometimes they overdid it. Law and order was always an issue on the frontier, a life and death issue, literally. Justice became a public spectacle, a mob scene. And when the camera came to record it, the taking of the picture sometimes distracted the audience from the taking of a life. Change came. The railroad changed. When they advertised, through trains without a change of cars to the land of milk and honey, well, it wasn't the same West anymore. There wasn't much glamour on the farmer's frontier where the real wealth was not under the ground, but the ground itself, the land, the good earth. The dime novel bravado of the mining towns was of no use here, where roots were going down and crops were coming up. Something deeper was needed. Character, stamina, faith. If it wasn't exactly a land of milk and honey, it was a land of hope. A settler named Caleb Atwater put it best. We of this generation, he said, are but pioneers. We have done much, but nothing in comparison to what the next generation will do. We came and saw and conquered. but the spoil is theirs. Long before it happened, men like Caleb Atwater dreamt it and saw it coming. Sometimes, in America, reality outstrips the dream. In hardly more than a lifetime, a flourishing state grew from a raw frontier, and from a cluster of log cabins came a mountain metropolis, Denver. Old Mike Fink would not have been happy. Once he said, "What's the use of improvements? Where's the fun, the frolicking, the fighting?" Gone. All gone. Well, not entirely. Some of the color and some of the fun linger on. The days of boom and bonanza may be over, but Central City, for one, refused to become a ghost town. It became a thriving remember when town instead, and tapped a whole new motherlode of mountain gold. Tourists. What was once deathly serious is now only a curiosity, a joke. They come for a whiff of the Old West, a touch of the American past. A trip into yesterday can be a relief. It was the durable dream of the old frontier. Try your luck and strike it rich. In the Colorado mountains, it happened. But now the mines are only sightseeing stops. You'll never duplicate old Horace Tabor's luck in making 10 million in silver overnight. But you can still come to Bonanza Country and dream about it. They still come to Gregory Gulch, where it all started, and try to raise color the way the old prospectors did. And they'll tell you there's still plenty gold in those hills. Maybe, just maybe, it could all happen over again.
But something infinitely bigger than any new gold strike has already happened in the Colorado mountains. A new frontier has sprung up. On the eastern slope of the Rampart Range, on acres that once were ranch land, a new breed of mountain man has taken over. The cadets of the United States Air Force Academy. Where hunter and trapper roamed in buckskin not long ago, now the space-age pilots of tomorrow march. The Rockies have become what the military calls its command post for survival. For inside these age-old mountains is stowed the awesome gear of atomic defense and retaliation. When Daniel Boone led the first party through the Cumberland Gap, when the first covered wagons headed west through the wilderness, who could have imagined? She's called the Centennial State. It was 1876 when she joined the Union. And that was a year for Americans to remember.